So following the sketch of yesterday's hand drill, which was a side view elevation, I've decided to continue that, do another side view, but then also make a three-dimensional sketch of the same thing. So I hope you can follow this process with me. As per usual, I'm using a pro marker with a chisel tip end, no warming up. So you'll be seeing me sketching from raw, and I think this is a good way of practicing getting your lines nice and consistent without the need of warming up all the time. So to start with, we're going to be drawing a side view over here. Let's see what we can do. So I think it'll be good to start with a box frame of some kind. Right, maybe a center line. Now the drill is going to be facing that way to the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little bit different this time around and make it diagonal and push its handle down like that. Okay, and then create the battery pack. Okay, so we have the general layout. I hope you can see this well. Okay, so now's the time when we can add some details in places. Round off the edge, give it a little cut there on the side. Again, this is the first drawing of the day, and I think it's a very good practice to be able to draw without criticizing your work too much when you begin. One thing I failed to include in yesterday's drawing of the drill that I did was a release for the battery pack, so I might just include that in this one. So I'm thinking the battery pack connects up here. Nice and simple. Okay. So we've got quite a good impression of what this hand drill looks like now in a side elevation. And because I made a little frame around it and built the sketch around the frame, you're able to proportion things a little bit better. Now you see that the drill is actually sitting at a, I would say, a 35-degree angle, which is quite nice. Gives it a little bit more dynamism. Okay, next step is now converting it into something three-dimensional. So what I'm going to do is start by, again, making a frame around it. So we're going to build a rectangle, and I'm thinking the direction of the rectangle will be that way. So with these three-dimensional sketches, I like to work from the top down. So that's not going to be different in this video. Top down. Now, if you know anything about basic sketching, you know that within a box frame that you create, you have all sorts of opportunities to design in that space. So similarly, you see where the box is here relative to this picture. The handle is not, the starting point for the handle was down here, which is, I'd say it's about a quarter of the way back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push some kind of line just about a quarter of the way back and pull it down. So that's going to be the starting point of the handle. Okay, and that can be the end point. Okay, and the same way I'm going to do it again. Another handle down. Okay, we have something. So within this square shape, you see that we can now create some kind of box frame around for the battery pack. And again, like I said, because I'm doing this by eye and I'm not really referencing my lines very well, there's bound to be a few mistakes here and there, but all's forgiven. Okay, this looks really peculiar. We'll have to fix it in a few places. Okay, we're going to start by just building a cylinder or a few cylinders within this box frame and pulling some lines out and across. Again, use these frames as some kind of reference point for you, whatever helps. Okay, this is quite a mess. The idea of using these lines is for the sake of reference. You get some semblance of perspective that might be able to help you during the process. So we'll get to neatening up these lines as we go. I want to add some kind of arc that's at the back of this drawing over here. So just a simple round, and I wanted to close this up somehow. So I'm thinking create a sphere which covers the back of the sketch, and then round it off and close it up. Nice and simple. You get a good understanding of perspective that way. Right, now what I do like to do in some occasions is give it a bit of a cross section, which might help your reference lines. This is a very good center line. Now what I've been saying in most of my videos when it comes to drawing a straight line is to lock your shoulder, keep your arm nice and straight, and pull the line through. So now we have some semblance of the line that's going to help us with the actual end piece of the drill. Again, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, why I like using a pen of this kind, a marker pen, is that if you do make mistakes, or if your lines are a little bit off, you can always end up correcting them by going back and just neatening them up. So we're rounding off the handle. What we might want to do is incorporate some kind of oval into the handle so that we can work around that base. Next step, let's refine this box a little bit for the battery pack. This looks a little bit skewed, but it's okay. What I find is a good method of cleaning things up is adding arcs to the edges, like I've just done here. I've added an arc from the back to the battery pack over here. Of course, there's a bit of a difference between these two, is that this one's actually flat and facing forward, where this one's at an angle. Angled sketches are a little bit more complicated, and I think for this exercise I'm going to keep it nice and basic in the way of explaining this. Okay, I've said this in a couple of videos, is to double up your lines. By that I mean it adds a little bit more reinforcement, it gives it a bit more of an edge. Okay, now we are going to continue this joining line, maybe add another reference line along the back. Let's add a trigger, which should come down the middle, and like with all of these lines, the trigger is being pushed outwards, so you'd add a reference line here and curve it up. Okay, this trigger is a little bit fatter than I would have liked, but it's okay, it's a good start. So we have some kind of hand drill that's making its way. Of course, working with an A4 piece of paper does limit you in some areas. I wanted to fit this all on the page, but because I pushed this perspective down too fast, it was wrong. And now just looking at the drawing, I can see the perspective of this trigger is actually off. That's a little bit better. See, it helps having some form of reference line, because it gives you a better understanding of what's going on in the background. Okay, I'm going to now work on the exterior surface of the drill. We have this part of the chuck over here. I'm not too happy with the length of this thing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a bit of a bigger ellipse. Okay. Now doing these techniques, being able to sketch ellipses and squares and circles by eye trains your eye to see things in perspective. Instead of using tools and an ellipse and ship curves and all those gadgets that help you, it's a very good method being able to sketch by eye and seeing where your mistakes lie. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to add some kind of grip thickness, and what I'd like to do is wrap the grip around the back. So I'm going to arc it upwards, add a little bit of thickness to the grip, and then wrap it down and around. It's a very chunky looking handle, but it's okay. That's the way it is. Next, let's refine this part of the chuck itself. Now, what I like to do with any chuck on a drill is to add some form of hole, showing that it is something that's been machine cut, and giving it a little bit of added perspective, a little bit of added dimension. Now, you can refine these edges by going over it with a little bit of a darker edge of the pen. Now we have something that has a bit of depth to it. In the same way, the end of this chuck, I might want to add some screw holes to give it a bit more dynamism. Okay, so we have the bare essentials. Now, what I haven't addressed is how this connects up to the battery pack. What I'm thinking is maybe to draw some kind of reference circle. So it's another way of doing a little freehand ellipse and pulling some kind of connection there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And on the same far side, I'll repeat it. Okay, and over here what I'll do is I'll add some doubling lines, which gives it some idea of how it's been attached, how you might want to disconnect it. Okay, now over here, like the last drill sketch that I did, if you haven't seen it, it's a side profile. I added some texture by just doing some diagonal lines along the sides. That's a very nice layout. I can't imagine what the perspective looks like on the camera, but we have something that resembles a drill that looks pretty interesting. It looks in perspective, at least. The next step will be to maybe add some more detail on the drill casing itself, and what I would suggest would be to maybe add some kind of shut line. Now, this is a very good example of a shut line that's running right through the casing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this center line as a reference, but pull and give it a bit of a curve inwards. Okay, that looks quite interesting. Nice. Now what you might want to do is add some kind of detailing on the top, like if you wanted maybe a manual release button or some kind of indentation. What you can do is you can, again, following the same lines that I've been using, these reference lines that I started off from the very beginning, it's all just about building on top of those lines. So what I'm doing now is I'm building on top of those lines by following a similar perspective that I used in the very beginning. So I'm thinking maybe giving it a bit of depth by pulling that through and then pulling a line across. So now we have some semblance of depth going on here, and then you might want to round off the edges. So we have a little detail, a small detail inside here. I don't know what this would be for, but it's just another visual addition to add. Question is, what should we add on this section on the side? I'm thinking maybe a exploded view of the chuck itself. So to do that, what we can do is we draw a center line, runs through the middle, and then we just start playing with ellipses. So first thing, I'm thinking we have some kind of axle that connects to the chuck. Then we have the chuck itself, which would be big in the beginning and then tapering down to being something quite small. We link that up. Okay. Then we have the extension of the chuck, which is some kind of piece that's being tightened. That's part 3, and then we would obviously have the drill bit. So there is something going on here which is pretty nice. Some kind of reference for someone to look at. Like with most concept sketches, you wanted to be able to illustrate and explain visually. You don't want to you don't want text to be the thing that makes the drawing known to people. You need to try and have it made in such a way that a person's able to look at it and visually understand what's going on, what's being expressed in the drawing. And that comes with practice, like everything in life. So we have 3 parts. We have part number 1, part number 2, part number 3. I don't know what kind of texture would be on this rod. I'm not thinking it's going to be hollow, it's going to be solid, but this is going to be hollow. And this will be hollow inside, maybe. Okay, so we have a nice communicative sketch of a hand drill, starting from a side view elevation that's been boxed in and framed. Then we have a perspective view that's been built up in a orderly fashion from the top down. And then we have a descriptive view of how the chuck might function, how it might assemble itself. It's a very useful exercise using a tool like a marker pen, because any mistake you make or you think you might make, you can always go over again, refine it, make it darker, make it a bit more defined. So I hope you've learned something from this little tutorial, and I'm very interested in continuing these types of drawings. These are as complicated as they get. Being able to explain a drawing with a 3-dimensional view, a side projection and a top projection is difficult, but it's doable. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.